Okay, well, thank you everybody for showing up. There may be some others who show up with us before we get too far along, and yeah, I never know. It's always been a different number of people who have been here, and then of course there'll be a YouTube video from this. I don't know who wants to watch a YouTube video of me and of a timeline that goes by, but it is what it is, right? Can we start with a word of prayer? Thank you, Father, for the opportunity to get together with friends and family and just to look into the Word of God, and especially an important section about um, about the second coming of Christ and how we see the foreshadowing of that, and really the shadows themselves that seem to be getting larger and larger. So guide our study today, Father, I ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
So as we go today, um, if you have it, this is a Bible study, it's not a sermon. And because of that, if you have a question, just please unmute yourself and ask the question. Don't wait for me to stop. Uh, if you're too annoying, I'll just ignore you. But otherwise, I'll actually answer your questions because I'm very glad that all of you are there. So I want to start off by looking. Let's see, where's my share button? Here we go. I'm going to pull up my thing here, and I want to start where we started last time, just because to me it's important that everybody understands what we're doing here. And so I'm going to read from First Thessalonians chapter 4, these verses. For this we say to you by the word of the Lord, that we who are alive and remain until the coming of the Lord will by no means precede those who are asleep. For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of an archangel, and with the trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds of the air to meet
Oh,
in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and thus we shall always be with the Lord. Therefore, comfort one another with these words. Now, what I want to do is just kind of remind you a little bit of our timeline that we are working on here. And for anybody who wasn't here last time or the time before, the line right, the horizontal line through the middle is the it's a timeline. And right now, if you took it all the way over on the left side and kept going to the left, you would go all the way back to the time of Pentecost. But right now we're in the present church age, as it says over here, and one of these days the rapture of the church is going to take place. I think it's going to be very soon. Guess we'll find out. After that, there will be 7 years of tribulation, which we've looked at pieces of it as we've gone, and then the second thing that will happen, so far as the return, the second coming of Christ, the rapture being the first part that happens in the clouds of the air. So we won't know. We'll be there, but the world won't see it. The second time everybody who is alive will see the return of Christ to earth to become the judge. And then there will be 1,000 year reign of Christ on earth, the final judgment, and then after that, the eternal state will kick in and eternity will begin. So that's an exciting time as we think about it, just beyond what we could think of. Now, before I get into today's study, I just wanted to bring up a couple of things that really kind of relate to last week. First of all, we last week we talked about the fact that Daniel 12:4 says at the very end of time, knowledge is going to increase. And we talked about that a little bit and how knowledge has just exponentially gone forward in just the last couple decades. Well, I was reading something this week I wanted to bring up. There's a company known as Anthropic. I'm sure some of you have heard of it. And they own an AI program called Claude. Claude is something akin to Chat GPT. So if you don't know what Claude is, think Chat GPT. But Claude is from a different company. And they told the world this month that they had just built an artificial intelligence model that is so powerful that it was too dangerous to release to the world, to release widely. And the program that Anthropic released is one called Mythos, or Claude Mythos, even Mythos, and it is capable of finding and exploiting hidden flaws in the software that runs the world's banks, the power grids, and even world governments. And this is a real game changer for whoever has such power. I guess that makes it good for the United States in some ways, because Claude is a, or Anthropic is an American company that came up with it first. And without getting too far into the weeds of why this is such a big deal, a Russian outlet called this model, quote, worse than a nuclear bomb, close quote. It could be that dangerous to the safety of Russia and China and any other nation. And basically, Mythos puts all of the world's financial institutions on notice that they could be hacked. Even though the blockchain system of protecting digital money is still in place, Mythos has the uncanny ability to find every other vulnerability in any type of system, both for the money going in to a blockchain or the money coming out. Now, I don't know, I have a lot of understanding about that, a little bit, but in the wrong hands, this technology could probably take down the financial underpinnings of nations and certainly their banks. And that's how AI is changing the world. We really live in some pretty harrowing times. So that was one. And the other one, an update on the cashless society. We had talked about that last time, and Ray Parlett, who is on our call today, he brought this to my attention that China, which we talked about them just a little bit last week, has implemented a cashless system for their public transportation. And if you fall out of favor with the government, your money, as we would call it, is not accepted by the buses and trains. And especially in China, people can't necessarily afford vehicles, so they're very dependent on public transportation. And so basically, this is one of those things where you better do what the government tells you to do, or your money's no good. You can't go anywhere. So those are just a couple updates. And again, if you've got any input that you wanted to give, just unmute yourself and feel free to share if you've heard of something along that
Can I
line.
raise my hand? This is Chris.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Chris.
That Daniel verse that you brought up, I've heard referenced in a bunch of different ways, but the one gentleman explained how knowledge for a long time stayed pretty consistent. He used the example of boating, where ship-faring people back in the Bible days, up until the late 1800s, probably could have gotten on a boat and known how to where the ropes were and what they did, and then things changed drastically in technology, or everything increased. But in the context of that verse of 12, verse 4, Daniel 12, I have a sense that he's not talking necessarily about access to knowledge or depth of knowledge. I think he's speaking specifically to the spiritual knowledge or understanding, because he is talking to Daniel, who has just asked, is this for my time? And he says no, and then gives a list in the beginning of verse 12, or chapter 12. And down at verse 4 that you've referenced, it says, but as for you, Daniel, conceal these words. In other words, leave them mysterious and seal up the book until the end of time. Many will go back and forth, and here's the quote, knowledge will increase. I believe that the understanding and application of scriptures will become more clear to the end times generation, because it is applicable to the end times generation. So I think, though knowledge will increase obviously does fit to the internet and AI and all these things, I think it really speaks to the church and those seeking to understand the end. There'll be application and clarity being revealed, and mysteries being understood, and timing will be more obvious. I mean, I think the Thessalonians 5 verse you mentioned, you are not children of darkness. In other words, you won't be fooled by it. It comes like a thief, but you're not those children.
I agree with you at least part way, Chris. I do think it speaks to spiritual things. in a great way, because and there has been a lot more spiritual things even since the 1800s. You go back before the 1800s, and even the rapture itself wasn't understood by a lot of people, and I'm not sure it's understood now. But I think, the men going to and fro also indicates that this is talking about more than just spiritual. I think it's talk and the fact that we've never seen anything like what society is like today. So yeah, great point. Appreciate that. All right, let's get into today's study. I want to read two sets of scriptures, one of them in Second Thessalonians 2, the other one in Genesis chapter 5. So Second Thessalonians 2, 9 through 12. This is something we've talked about before, but as you see how we go into it later on, you'll understand why we're looking at it. So, verse 9, the coming of the lawless one is according to the working of Satan with all power, signs, and lying wonders, and with all unrighteous deception among those who perish, because they did not receive the love of the truth, that they might be saved. And for this reason, God will send them a strong delusion that they should believe the lie, that they all may be condemned who did not believe the truth, but had pleasure in unrighteousness. And I want to team that up right now with Genesis chapter 5, verses 21 through 24. Enoch lived 65 years and begot Methuselah. After he begot Methuselah, Enoch walked with God 300 years and had sons and daughters. So all the days of Enoch were 365 years, and Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. Now, I've started with these verses because this is an Old Testament picture of the rapture, okay, or at least it's a foreshadowing of the rapture. Enoch walked with God, and then one day God took him. And by the way, comparing that to Hebrews 11:5, it says, "By faith Enoch was taken away so that he did not see death." So if you're wondering what it means that God took him, he did not see death. Um, I didn't have them in my notes, but I looked it up later on. So he was taken off this earth by God suddenly. And by the way, not long after that, relatively speaking, generationally wise anyway, in the very next chapter of the Bible, the judgment of God was seen by a worldwide flood. And but in the end times, the judgment of God is coming again, and it will be seen differently. Obviously, we're not going to have a flood, so it's going to be different. But the question I want to start out is, what did people think back in Enoch's day? What do you think they thought when they suddenly realized that Enoch had vanished? Have you ever thought about that concerning Enoch? It's just one person, but all of a sudden he was there and then he wasn't there. That would have been something, don't you think? So, I would say perplexity would be one way. They would say, what happened to him? Where did they go looking for him? Was he there one moment and gone the next? So, and so as you think about that, imagine such a disappearance happening to millions of people at the same time. And what will the world be like the day after the rapture? Millions of people have gone suddenly missing. Some will be walking with another person one moment, and then they won't be there anymore. Um, Relatively speaking, very few people are going to understand what happened, that those who disappeared were suddenly removed from this planet and went to meet the Lord in the clouds of the air and then taken to heaven to be with the Lord forever. Yeah, and I was thinking about that earlier. What would happen if if a if a doctor and a patient was being operated on by a doctor, and all of a sudden the doctor disappeared, and then I thought about it the other way around. What if the patient was the one who disappeared, and all of a sudden that the doctor is working and there's nobody there? So, because the patient's not going to, the nurses and stuff would know, but the patient's probably going to be under anesthesia anyway. But it would be pretty funny if all of a sudden the doctor looked down, nobody was there. So, what will it be like the next day? What will people be saying? How will governments respond to this whole thing? And we don't really have any way of knowing for sure, but there's bound to be a lot of questions in the world. Okay. Did airplane pilots suddenly disappear with a plane flying a plane full of passengers? If so, I hope there's a really good co-pilot who's on board. Um, or bus drivers on the highway of a bus full of people. So the big question is, how will people make sense of the rapture? And I want to discuss that today. And because I think people, when the rapture happens, people are going to be wide open for suggestions. Um, you know who believes in the rapture? Satan does. He knows the Bible, Satan does. And we need to remember that. He even quoted, or maybe I should say, he misquoted certain scriptures, passages to Jesus after the Lord's 40 days of fasting in the desert, Matthew 4 and Luke 4. And what Satan doesn't want is for the rapture to occur and then see a world that's confused that would turn to Christ and be saved. So we can be sure that he doesn't want that. And so if that's the case, then I think what we can do is we can understand that he is going to try to put something into place that would fix that. Okay. So, and it could be a real possibility. If there's nothing in place, people may start believing in the rapture. And so Satan is going to try to build a false narrative as to what happened. And I mean, we're talking about it past tense as if it already had happened, but he needs to make up a story, and he needs to start with the story, making it up before it actually happens, so that it's in place. And I think we can make a good case that he has been working on such a plan to deceive the world into believing that this grand disappearance of millions of people, when it happens, is not the rapture, but that it's something else. So the question is, what is the devil's plan? And how do these things go along with the scriptures that we read? And let me just see. We have a okay, and enter UFOs and aliens. Well, you're one step ahead of me. Good. Thank you for thinking about that. So let's talk about that. I want to share with you an article that was found on many websites. Okay. And, when we're talking about it, we are thinking about UFOs, and we are thinking of they also go by not just UFOs, but UAF or UAP, unidentified aerial phenomena. But I want to share with you, before we get to the, the, the thing from Gallup, I want to share with you an article that was found on many websites in July of 2025, including Fox News, including the Rochester Democrat and Chronicle newspaper, and a lot of other places. And it's about these things. The article is this: New York State has seen 66 reported unidentified aerial phenomena, okay, UFO really, sightings during the first half of 2025, according to a report from the National UFO Reporting Center. I didn't even know they had such a thing, but they do. National UFO Reporting Center, which is NUFORC, okay, in case you're looking for an acronym. With 66 distinct incidents logged between January and late June, the state has had reports of an array of mysterious aerial objects, ranging from glowing orbs to silent triangles to fast-moving disks and shape-shifting lights. The incidents, according to NUFORC, span rural hamlets, suburban skies, and the bustling airspace of the Big Apple.
Dennis, can
So
you
now,
scroll up a bit? I'm only seeing the top line of that, what you're reading, I think.
can you see it now better?
Yeah, there you go. Yep, thank you.
Okay, I can never tell how low somebody is looking. Something else to think about, and that is this came from Wikipedia. So realize that, yeah, I mean, a lot of most of Wikipedia stuff I think is true, but some of it might not know. While no exact official global number exists, estimates suggests tens of thousands of people in North America alone have claimed to be abducted by aliens. Surveys in the early 1990s suggest that as many as 1 in 50 adults in the U.S. may have experienced some sort of encounter with a UFO or even what they think are aliens. Now, I am not one, I'm one of the 98% has none of that, but 2% of people have had some sort, and maybe it's just to see UFO in the area. I don't know. I see stuff on TV. However, many cases go unreported and no physical evidence has been verified. So, what do you think about UFOs? Are these possibly aliens from other planets or stars or faraway galaxies? What do you think?
I have a comment that would be from a little bit earlier, is if this is something that no one's going to know why the Christians aren't around, how come we're not telling people? Like, as a part of witnessing, I should be probably putting that in my spiel, you know?
There are certain ministries out there that are doing a really good job, but I think a lot of places you're not hearing it at all. There's one group that I read about, and they actually sell these little booklets, and they're less than $1 a piece. It's called "Where Did All the People Go?" And they actually suggest that people leave them like on a desk or on some place around, so if they suddenly disappear, when their loved ones come in looking for them, they'll find the document. So kind of an interesting thought to do that, because you're right. If we actually believe that this is going to happen soon, we should be ready, and we should make sure that that other people around us, which is, by the way, one of the reasons why we're doing this today. So here's this quote from Gallup. Okay. Approximately 30 to 42%. I don't know why they have such a wide number, but that's what they have. Approximately 30 to 42% of Americans believe that some UFOs, unidentified flying objects slash the UAP, are alien spacecraft visiting from other planets or galaxies, according to polling from 2021 to 2023. Recent trends suggest this belief is growing, up from roughly 20% in the 1990s. So in some cases, it's doubled, with a significant segment of the population believing in extraterrestrial life generally. Now, personally, I don't believe in any of this has to do with aliens from outer space. I'm not dogmatic about this, and I would be careful to be dogmatic about whether, when somebody sees a UFO, what it is. But there's no solid evidence that aliens exist, which is one of the reasons I can't say they don't exist. There's no solid evidence that they don't exist either. And if they do exist, though, why do they always seem to have some sort of resemblance to humans? For example, they have eyes, they have a mouth, and so on. Are you telling me that this is the only way they evolved, just like we supposedly did, even though they were from 100 light years away? Is that all we got? I don't know. Just a thought.
Not to mention, they've got a lousy sense of clothing. No one seems to be able to make a decent outfit.
Chris, you took the words right out of my mouth, but I was going to let one of the people who are better on dressing themselves than me. So,
well, that would definitely not be me.
So, aliens are not in the Bible, but look what God says about the earth and this planet only. Isaiah 45:18. For thus says the Lord, who created the heavens, who is God, who formed the earth and made it, who has established it, who did not create it in vain, who formed it to be inhabited. I am the Lord and there is no other. God formed the earth for a special purpose. He established it intentionally and gave it an enduring design. It's not a waste place, but it was to be inhabited by mankind. There's no other place spoken of that like in the Bible, in the same way that the earth is spoken of. Now, is there any place in the universe where other people, people could live, or creatures could live? Yeah, maybe. I don't know. But I do know that the Bible doesn't talk about it. And if anybody knows anything different than that, then be happy to hear from you. But that said, I do believe that some people, maybe many, have made contact with creatures that look like what we suppose aliens are supposed to look like. And this has gotten bigger and bigger in our culture. So if these people are not seeing aliens, the question is, what are they seeing? What are they seeing? So let's talk about that.
What did
I
Pat just
believe,
write?
I'm sorry?
What did Pat just write? I didn't see the whole thing.
I don't know. I do know somebody said UFOs earlier.
She said
So,
something about Ezekiel.
oh, Ezekiel. Pat, I don't, you can unmute yourself if you want.
Okay, what I'm referring to, do you remember back in the Bible, Ezekiel saw that wheel up in the sky and it was totally unfamiliar? And
Yeah.
that's not the only time, only reference. But that's one of the ones that I remember.
Well, and that's actually a pretty good one to remember. Okay. Because what was that? It wasn't an alien. Okay. It was actually, I mean, it was some sort of angelic thing or even God thing that he saw. So it wasn't an alien. Um, and I think that's in chapter 1 or chapter 2. It's very early in Ezekiel. And I didn't even think about that. So I'm glad you brought that up. But it actually, in some ways, goes along with in a cousin sort of way with what we're talking about here. So good one.
Okay.
So so what are they, if these people are not seeing aliens, what are they seeing? Well, I believe they're making contact with demons. Or maybe a better way to say it is demons are making contact with them. Okay. Because I think this can happen with people who are not using an Ouija board or not using drugs or things like that. Now, the question is, though, is there any evidence that this is the case? And if these are demons, why are they doing what they do? Why are they flying around in UFOs? All right. Do they just like to ride around in spaceships and enjoy scaring people? Or is there a deeper and more sinister goal here? And if so, what's the goal? So those are the kind of questions. And we're going to take a quick trip through the scriptures and we will look first at something that Jesus said. And that's in Matthew chapter 24. Jesus said, "But as the days of Noah were, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. For as in the days before the flood they were eating and drinking, marrying and given in marriage, until the day that Noah entered the ark, and did not know until the flood came and took them all away, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be." Now, the question is, what were the days of Noah like? I mean, because Jesus said, as in the days of Noah, so also will be the coming of the Son of Man. So I think it makes sense for us as we kind of think about these things to talk about what the days of Noah were like, because this is key in some of these things. So now I wrote I put these verses on the stuff that's I wanted to make sure you had context, but there's also the stuff in blue I'm concentrating on. The other ones are great for you to know and things, but for our study today, I don't want to read them. Just because they take up a lot of time. But let me just read what's in the blue. For this is Genesis 6, 1 through 5. This is where the flood narrative begins. Okay. Now it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves of all whom they chose. Down to verse 4. There were giants on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them, those who were mighty men, who were of old, men of renown. Then the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Verse 7, so the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth. Verse 8, but Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Now notice what life on earth had devolved to in Noah's day. Again, look at verse 2 and verse 4. And we need to talk about this. That the sons of God, who are they, saw the daughters of men, that they were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves of all whom they chose. There were giants on the earth in those days, verse 4, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, there it is again, and they bore children to them, those who were of mighty men, who were of old, men of renown. Now the question is, who were these sons of God? Okay, that came into the daughters of men and then produced these really monstrous people. Now, we need to understand that these sons of God were not human. Okay, rather, they were fallen angels. And a fallen angel is a demon, another name for demon. Now, let me make this clear by showing you some other passages. And because this is kind of important to understand that the sons of God are not human. All right. This is, and maybe you are very familiar with these things, or maybe you're not familiar with them at all, but I think it's important. So, and we get some of our information here from the book of Job. We actually 3 different passages. A couple of them are right on early. Now, and Job, you know the story of Job where God has a conversation with Satan, and God points to Job and says what a great guy he is, and Satan, and wants to incite God to do something to show that Job is going to fail if he doesn't get his own way. But I want you to notice the lead up to that verse. Job 1:6. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, the sons of God. All right. And Satan also came among them. And the Lord said to Satan, from where do you come? And I want you to notice that the same thing happens in chapter 2. Again, verse 1. There was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them to present himself before the Lord. Now the question is, who are these sons of God? And I submit to you that the answer is they were angels, and at least some of them were fallen angels, all right, because Satan was there. Now, there may have been other fallen, I don't know, maybe God called all the angels in the world together one day, I don't know. But here's the question. How do we know that these sons of God were angels and not just human men, and that Satan simply joined them in these instances spoken of by Job? If you read those passages, you could come to that conclusion, don't you think? If that's all we had. But we have a little bit more than that. Okay, we have down in Job 38 something else, because the answer is that God told Job that these sons of God were there at the time the world was created, okay, before mankind was created. Okay, so look at Job 38. Now, this is in Job 38, we are actually reading part of a conversation that took place between God and Job. All right, God was he was at the point now where he started out and said, who is this who darkens counsel with words without knowledge? All right, speaking about Job. And I don't know that any of us would have done anywhere near as good as Job did, but God was still like, all right, I've got to show Job a few things. So he said to Job, where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. So God's actually being a little sarcastic with Job. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line upon it? To what were its foundations fasted? Or who laid its cornerstone when the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God, there's that phrase again, shouted for joy? Now, what we're looking at here. From this, we learn that the sons of God were there at the creation of the earth. They actually saw God doing all of this miraculous stuff. So if they were there, they could not be human. All right, because humans weren't created by God till the sixth day of creation. So this has already happened. And not only that, on the sixth day of creation, at least at the beginning of it, when God created, how many men did he create? Just one. All right. Just Adam in the beginning. So these sons of God were angels, and some of the angels in this universe, some of these angels, a third of all angels that God created, they fell along with the devil. In other words, they became demons. And if you're looking for a verse on that, Revelation 12:4. Okay, it talks about Satan with his tail pulling a third of the stars out of the sky, and that's actually talking about angels as well. And you can actually see that in the verses we just looked. Look at verse 7. When the morning stars sang together, the morning stars is another word for angels. And so again, a third of all angels in this that are in the universe are fallen angels. Happily, 2/3 of them are not fallen angels. Now, knowing this puts an important spin on what happened in the days of Noah. Okay, Jesus said his coming would be like the days of Noah. Well, what happened in the days of Noah? All these sons of God, these fallen angels, demons, I think in order to pollute the seed of mankind and keep the Messiah from ever being born, they impregnated the women and created really what I would call a hybrid race. Okay, and they did this right before the flood, and they did it in the days of Noah, right before judgment fell, and it's likely that part of the reason for the flood was this. Okay, and they didn't just, by the way, they didn't just do it once. All right, these angels who, now I don't, if please don't ask or even spend too much time thinking, how can an angel have relations with a woman and make babies? Okay, um, we don't know the answer to that. At least I don't. Okay, but it happened. And they did it in the days of Noah, right before the flood. And the thing was, they didn't just do it once, they also tried the same thing after the flood. Okay. And if you look at Genesis 6:4, we looked at those verses way in the beginning or earlier. But in verse 4, it says there were giants on the earth in those days. Okay. The offspring of the sons of God and the daughter of men. But it says they were giants on the earth in those days and also afterward, after the flood, after the days of Noah. And I think the giant, so they actually traded again. Have you ever wondered where Goliath came from if he was 9 feet tall? And some of these, there's a very good chance that Goliath and other descendants in that area were the descendants of these Nephilim, as they were known. And by the way, I was watching a YouTube video just the other day. And I love watching some of the historical YouTube videos, especially of the Appalachian Mountains and such. And in Kentucky, in a number of different places, they uncovered skeletons of men who were 10 feet tall and taller. Some were, I think one was up to 12 feet tall. So these were monsters. And these are the sorts of things that could have happened, not just in one time in that one area of where Noah was from, but it could have happened all over the world. Okay, so I don't know about that, but when these angels did that, how's God stopped that from happening? Well, I guess he could destroy the angels altogether, but he actually did it in a different way. All right, and that is God put these guys in jail, let's call it. And we see that in the book of Jude. Jude only has one chapter, but it has verse 6. And if you're looking for Jude, it's the book right before Revelation. And it says in Jude 6, and the angels who did not keep their proper domain, but left their own abode, he has reserved in everlasting chains under darkness for the judgment of that great day. So these angels who did this, who had relations with women that led to these these giants, these men of renown. Um, it appears that the fallen angels mostly stopped doing this because they recognized they were going to be going into everlasting chains under darkness until judgment. And so, because it was such a hideous crime. I mean, that's the way I read this. Okay. So that's one good way to stop them. Questions, comments, amusing anecdotes.
I have a silly question. So angels and slash demons can then kind of shape shift. I mean, if they're if the demons are coming down and portraying themselves as men, their bodies are men's bodies, unless they took possession of a regular man's body and did that instead of shifting into human form. But if you're saying that aliens are demons, then they're shifting themselves to look in the fashion that we are led to believe aliens look like.
Well,
So
I'm not saying that aliens are demons. I'm saying that demons masquerade as aliens. Okay. In other words, they want us to think that they're aliens, that they're from other planets and things, but they're not. They want people to think that. Okay. But they don't want people to think that they're demons, because if somebody thought that they were doing something with a demon, that would, in many cases, scare them away completely. Does
I
that
get
help?
that, but no, I understand that, but I guess I was not saying it right. But they have the ability to change their form then.
Well, they do have the ability to, at least some of them do, to, regular angels, and I suppose maybe demons. I haven't really thought too much about that. But most of the time when they appear in the scriptures, they actually look like human beings. I mean, you and I were talking the other day about when Abraham met the Lord and two other people in before they went down to Sodom, and that was in Genesis 18. And it said they looked like men. And so yeah, they can do that. Now, I didn't, I really hadn't thought too much about whether they could act like men by having relations with women, but apparently they could do that as well. Does that help?
Yeah, I guess it just kind of opened up a can of worms for me. I'm feeling a little disturbed about it because I never thought of um, demons, who used to be angels, having relations with women and them actually being able to impregnate a woman if they were a spiritual body. So they really either just possessed men and used the male form that could impregnate women, or
I don't
how
think
could they
that's what
have
it
the
is.
creative ability to? You said you don't want to talk about it, but that's what's
Yeah.
sticking in my head. How is that
I
even
don't,
possible?
just real quick, I don't think DNA would transfer if they're borrowing a man's body. They wouldn't get corrupt DNA. So I don't know what it is either, but yeah, something alien about it. All in all, wholly alien, I would guess. To create monsters and large, giants and such. With just a speculation, I don't know.
Well, I don't think that the alien, ugh, here we go. Uh, I don't think that these demons, I don't think that they were inhabiting men's bodies. I think that they were masquerading as men, which is different. Okay. Because even as I think Chris was saying, if it was a man, it would still be his body, his fluids, and everything else.
It'd be
Whereas,
his DNA, not a foreign
it,
DNA.
right, right, and so for us to try to figure that out, scientifically speaking, I think it's impossible for us really to come to an answer on that.
So if
But
they can do that, they can certainly make themselves look like what we are thinking we're viewing as aliens.
uh, agreed. Yes,
Yeah,
they
why not?
can shape. I think the word used was shape shift, something like that. No, yeah, I think they could do that. Okay.
Huh.
I think they can make themselves look really ugly and scary sometimes too. So, we get back to then how does this fit with the alien sightings today? And how does this got to, with the days of Noah? Where do we go with this?
I think there's so much evil in the world today. That's why we're seeing all of these UFOs and alien stories, to take our eyes off what is really happening, and that is Satan is trying to take the world over. That's what I think it's about.
Well, I think there's probably some of that going on, Pat. Um, but I think it even goes deeper than that. But I think you're definitely on the right trail with that. And the fact that people are willing to accept evil in so many ways is just really it just feeds into it, makes it that much easier. It reminds me of the old Keith Green song, "No One Believes in Me Anymore." And he just talked, he was writing it as if the devil was speaking it, and that it just gets easier and easier
Yeah.
because people are more and more willing to accept it. Jesus told us that in the end times, right before Jesus would return, the world would be like it was in Noah's day. Okay. And I think the UFOs and alien sightings show us that this should be true because these aliens are likely demons. And in some cases, they're terrorizing people. But I think it goes deeper than just terror. And as I asked in the beginning of our study tonight, have you ever thought about what it will be, what will happen to this world immediately after the rapture? How are people going to explain it? Okay. And this is my opinion. All right. And I love to hear anybody else's opinion. And I don't guarantee that it's right because we'll see. But this is what I think. I think at the time of the rapture, all right, the day after, all right, or a week after, whatever it is, I think that these aliens, quote unquote, because they're actually demons, will come and they will claim to have removed from the earth all of the people who disappeared because those people, Christians, are making it hard for mankind to quote unquote evolve to a new form. So they took away all the people, again, who happen to be Christian to make the world better. All right. Now, of course, it's not going to be better. It will be worse than we can imagine. But the world isn't going to know that because these are people and who don't know. Okay. So, and I think that this is the great deception. As we think about how are people going to buy this? Okay. This, I think, is the great deception. Thinking back to where we started in um, in Thessalonians. Okay. The coming of the lawless one is according to the working of Satan with all powers, signs, and lying wonders. All right. This is one of those lying wonders. And with all unrighteous deception, there's another good word, deception, among those who perish, okay, the unbeliever, because they did not receive the love of the truth that they might be saved. And for this reason, God will send them a strong delusion that they should believe the lie. All right. So I think this is the delusion. How come I don't believe? Why would somebody not believe that this is the rapture? Because there's a delusion. There's something that's going to send them off in the wrong direction, something that's going to sound good. Okay. And that verse 12, that they may all be condemned who did not believe the truth, but had pleasure of unrighteousness. And, as we think about it, what is the strong delusion that they're seeing? And it's again, it's my opinion that these aliens are actually demons. They'll show up, they'll tell the world they're from a foreign planet, even though they're not, and that they're there to help them. Now, and they will be seen by all because they're going to actually see these people. All right, you're going to see them on CNN and all the other channels. Um, and that they're from and this will be evidence that none of this is religious. Okay, all the disappearances of millions, it's not about God. It's or the supposed silly thing called the rapture, but it's about creatures from another planet coming to save the earth. All right. And here's the thing about today. Today, these alien sightings are happening here and there on Earth to condition people to believe in them when the day of the rapture comes. It's not going to happen brand suddenly. I mean, right now we see these things, we hear of UFOs, we watch it on TV, we enjoy the movies. Okay. Um, Independence Day. That's one where a guy is, I mean, it's a wonderful movie, but it's another one of those things. And all these things condition people today to believe in aliens. And we saw 40% of the people already believe in extraterrestrials, that when the day of the rapture comes, it's all the sightings we see today are part of Satan's ploy, trying to build this thing together, and getting people to believe the lie. Okay. And God's going to allow it. For this reason, God will send them a strong delusion, and that they should believe the lie. Thoughts?
Dennis,
Let me
just
give
out
you
of
one-
curiosity, are you saying that we are seeing more or hearing more reports of UFO sightings because of this?
I think so. Yeah, I think that there's more and more UFO sightings, um, and they're becoming more and more not only prevalent, but people are saying more and more things about them. I mean, I saw one on TV. It was probably 6 months ago now, where the guy talked about even seeing the I don't know that the plane landed or whatever it was, but actually saw one of these these demons or interplanetary whatchamacallums. So they're actually seeing them. So yeah, I think the numbers are going up, and I think it seems to be that way.
I
So,
wonder how well dressed he was.
What's that, Chris?
I say, I wonder
I
how well dressed he was. Oh, the other Chris. Sorry, go ahead.
I have two Chris's here.
yeah, I'm just wondering if there's if you have an explanation for why this is rising at this rate. If no one knows the day of the hour, is this something that you think is being put in place by Satan, or being permitted by the Lord, or what?
Yeah,
Because the
I
timing
think
is unpredictable.
well, is it though? I mean, it's unpredictable to the day and the hour, true. But at the same time, I think that when, Satan can look around and see where we are with a lot of the different signposts that we're very near the end. And I think that kind of ramps this whole thing up. So, and I think, that's one of the reasons for this study is to show how many signposts there are. And so I think that but you're right, he does not know the day or the time.
Hey, Dennis.
Yeah.
Chris, number 2 here. Right around that same verse regarding the sons of God, and right before that it says, God saw the wickedness of man was great on the earth. So the days of Noah was also similar to our days, as we see the wickedness increasing, and the sides, the line being drawn, you're on one side or the other. The division right now just seems to be incredible and increasing. And I think that is
Chris,
a comparison.
you're so right, especially we're not going to get to it today, but the next thing that we were going to look at was lawlessness, but we're not going to have time for it today. The Trump administration said that they will start releasing info about aliens and UFOs soon. Yeah, we'll see if that happens, and it'd be really interesting to see if they do. I think they'll probably release it just with the rest of the Epstein files too. So now, famous people who believe in aliens. Okay, I'm just going to kind of finish with this, all right? Vice President J.D. Vance believes these aliens are actually demons. Marjorie Taylor Greene, former U.S. Congresswoman, has indicated that she believes the theory that aliens are actually fallen angels or demonic beings. Tucker Carlson, the media personality, has publicly suggested that UFOs are demonic and shared personal anecdotes of being scratched by a strange, unexplainable entity. It was either that or his cat. I'm not sure which. Eric Burlison, U.S. Congressman, has described, the reported entities as, quote, extra dimensional or, quote, interdimensional, aligning this view with biblical descriptions of demons rather than biological creatures from another planet. Charlie Duke, a former NASA astronaut, by the way, the 10th man to walk on the moon, has stated that he believes UAPs are real, but are actually demonic beings rather than aliens. Dr. Hugh Ross, an astrophysicist, has argued that UFO encounters are demonic entities that target humans, especially those involved in occult practices. And finally, I'm going to close with this because it's kind of interesting. Representative Tim Burchett, Republican from Tennessee, has talked about alien life among us that has made contact with humans. And Burchett warned that releasing the secret alien information, the stuff that the Trump said that that the government secretly has, would devastate public confidence. The House task force member said that he was briefed on extraterrestrial matters and that it would be, quote, catastrophic if it was released. So as you can see, discussion around UFOs, UAPs, and extraterrestrial life are no longer confined to the fringe communities. All right. They have entered the mainstream conversation at the highest level. So, questions, comments, amusing anecdotes, anything anybody wants to share?
Well, it's like anything else. Why are people accepting the gay lifestyle that you would not have accepted not that many years ago? It's because these things are put in our face over and over and over again to condition us, like you said, to be accepted.
That's the big word, Pat.
And that's happening with everything, not just aliens, but how about all these pedophiles who say this is normal, this is, or how about all the transgender kids that they're forcing surgeries on? They're trying to get us to accept all of this really crazy crap.
That's true, Pat. And that's it's all conditioning. The devil knows it works. We all know it works.
Yeah.
We all know it works. So, at any rate, well, that's all I got for today.
Thank you.
You are welcome. So I'm going to put this on YouTube once we get it done, and then it'll be there. So if you want to review any of it, or if you want to pass it on to somebody else, I hope you do that. All right, everybody. God bless you. Thank you for being here. And
Thanks, Dennis.
we'll call it a day.
Thank you, Dennis.
All right. You're all welcome. Appreciate you being here. Bye now.